Okay, aloha everyone. My name is Dominique Cordy, and I have the pleasure of talking about panel 2, generating and managing knowledge. So I think I'm a little nervous, but Helen once said in a fabulous email that this isn't the sexy part of all the things that we're talking about today. So, and specifically, we're looking at kind of the research and reports and the data and archives, which is more of the pala side of things. So it's not the sole legacy of knowledge left by kupuna, or that we're even creating today, like in scholarship. But what we're kind of talking about here is the information and data that's used for decision making. And we want to know how we can make this more relevant and more respectful. So historically, not in the deep kahiko sense, but for sure in the last 50 years, data information has been generated in regards to wahikupuna stewardship and cultural resource management in a really largely Western framework and for a really compliance-based system. So think about laws like NEPA, NAGPRA, Section 106, Chapter 6E, 343, permit applications for building, water, and then even Ohana applying for Kuleana land tax on the county level. They're putting together their mo'okuauhau in a structure required for the specific exemption. So compliance is pushing us in so many ways to compartmentalize knowledge in this very specific research document data-driven way. So the idea is that restoration also triggers, but restoration also triggers to-dos funneled through compliance. So we have this need for reports, plans, and data that are generated to become more applicable to both the community's relationship with wahi and the wahi kupuna themselves. So rather than just burial treatment plans, we should have ho'oponopono plans. Rather than just restoration plans, we could have reuse plans. Just more proactive. So as a collective, we've acknowledged that compliance drives the context in which a large amount of this wahikupuna knowledge and information is created, is actively managed by public funds, and the compliance dictates how knowledge is made available somewhat to the public. This is the challenge that we're addressing today, and within which our topics and themes fall within. So over the last 2 years, the collective, the Huliauapaʻa collective, has convened meetings. We've done surveys. One of them you're required to do to register, and there's a purpose behind all this. We've done it to create topics and gather information, so we're not pushing these things on you. It's a discussion we're having together. So this was taken from the survey that you guys did when you registered. And the top collective goal identified that we've seen again and again come up is the need to gather knowledge and data for management rather than just research and compliance. And again, this is that reports, data, kind of archive information. So looking at all this collective information, we identified 3 hot topics, which are also challenges and promises that we can make to ourselves and to this collective. Because again, the purpose of this whole thing is that we're being proactive. Like, we want to create solutions. We don't want to just talk about negative things. So these are the topics that we're looking at today. And I'm not going to go too much into them because all these amazing people sitting in front of you will set the stage. But before we begin, I would like to offer some of the solutions that have come up in conversations and meetings and surveys. And these will be addressed in the breakout panels. And you guys might think they're great ideas or horrible ideas. You might have ways to implement them. But it's something to think of as we're talking here as some kind of direct action we can make. So within prioritized OEV knowledge systems, there's the idea to create a new wahikupuna inventory, not one that's dictated by what Alan was talking about, the bureaucratic challenges, but one that we can manage collectively versus individually or executively or as an agency, and we can decide how data is managed, presented, and disseminated. And then many of us create vast amounts of information, research, and knowledge in the work we do, and we can prioritize that data. collect it, manage it, make it accessible with culturally relevant attributes, management-focused information, and integrating legacy data that isn't represented in easily accessible interfaces or repositories right now. The second inventory, the inventory, that's the idea of developing a centralized hub, connecting all the disparate repositories of knowledge that you find about later after you've done all the research and you're like, oh, I didn't know about that. And the sub-goal perk would be information on Wahi Kupuna becomes more accessible to the community, it's less Oahu-centric. And the last, prioritize management-driven research. We could and should create a code of conduct or best management practices that drive this and that support us all, and then we actually adopt and implement it as a collective, and then we put pressure on the larger community to implement and adopt it as well. Easy, right? So think on these solutions, and in the meantime, I'd really like to introduce you to our wonderful panelists. So we have Helen Wong Smith. She's an archivist for University Records, and she has over 35 years of researching, working, and managing library and archival collections across Hawaii, with degrees in Hawaiian Studies and MLIS from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Her positions have included Historical Cultural Specialist for Kamehameha Schools Land Assets Division, Hawaiian Collection Librarian at UH Hilo, Lead Archivist for the Pacific Island Network of the National Park Service, Executive Director of the Kauai Historical Society, and Librarian Archivist for the State Historic Preservation Division, providing extensive experience with cultural resource databases. She's been elected the President of the Hawaiian Library Association, Hawaiian Historical Society, and twice of the Association of Hawaii Archivists, and the recipient of the Agnes C. Conrad Award and Distinguished Fellow of the Society of American Archivists. She currently serves on 2 National Archival and History Boards, and we're lucky to have her with us today. And Pūlama Lima was born and raised on Molokai. She's a PhD candidate in anthropology at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, specializing in Hawaiian and Pacific archaeology. Pūlama is the executive director of Ka'iwakīloumoku Cultural Heritage Center on Molokai and was recently hired as the Land Culture History Research Manager at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs under the Paia Kane Research Division, where she's tasked with the kuleana of providing quantitative, qualitative, and comparative research services to OHA in order to make informed decisions using credible historical analysis to protect Native Hawaiian physical and intellectual rights. In addition, Pūlama also oversees the Kuleana Tax Exemption Program, as well as the Papakilo and Kipuka digital repositories of Ike in Hawaii. And she's a mommy. She's little people. So, mahalo Pūlama. And then Gerard O'Regan. Gerard is from Aotearoa. Dr. Gerard O'Regan is Naitahu from the South Island. His iwi, Naitahu, has developed a cultural mapping website and oral history atlas called Kahuru Manu. He has a background in museums and Māori heritage management, including a decade on the Māori Heritage Council of the New Zealand Historic Places Trust. He has previously been heritage manager for his iwi and centrally involved in their rock art heritage endeavors. He's currently a research fellow at the University of Auckland's James Hinare Māori Research Center and is undertaking a Royal Society of New Zealand Marsden Fund research project on North Island Māori rock art. So, mahalo for coming all this way, John. And Jason Jeremiah is the director of the Natural and Coastal Resource Department at Kamehameha Schools. He's responsible for leading the implementation of KS's natural and cultural resource management activities across Kamehameha Schools Aina. He's worked in cultural resource management in both the private and public sectors in both management and advocacy roles. He served on various nonprofit organization boards and is currently the president of the Ka'upulehu Foundation. With his role at Kamehameha Schools, he works in both the management of cultural and natural resources, developing and sustaining Aina-based partnerships at the local and global levels, and works with philanthropic and funding networks to increase awareness of natural and cultural resource management challenges and opportunities in Hawaii. Jason also has small children. I think that's a really important thing to point out. These are amazing multitaskers. And we couldn't be here without Jason. He's been an important part of the design team and just pushing this whole movement forward. So I'm going to leave it to Helen. Mahalo, everybody.
Okay, so my apologies to all of you from a different generation, but for those of us who are of a certain generation, let's say it all together. Standards, what is it good for? Absolutely, okay. Really, this is probably the most unsexy topic one could think of, but but it's so damn important. Because this is what I have heard almost all of my career, is like, you know, we're just going to scan it and it's all fine. Not. So everybody says, doesn't OCR take care of everything? Well, here's an example. We all love Chronicling America because all the, the English language newspapers have been digitized. I think they're up to 1923 now, so from the beginning, this is across the country. But if you do a search and you limit it to Hawaii, as you see it's from 1789, because that's into 1963, and you type in Mauna Kea, what you have are the results, and they're talking about, and you can't say Mauna Kea and then mountain, because then you're just going to have it come up. So all of these references to Mauna Kea are regarding passengers who just arrived on the Mauna Kea, okay, the vessel. So no, OCR does not take care of everything. So you have wonderful resources like Papakilo, but this is what also happens as well. I typed in Bishop Street because I was doing, with Land Place. Marion Kelly was my mentor, and so everything is about land. And so this is, you put it in, and you have, performers. Now, granted, these were very unique performers, but it's not going to help me make land use decisions on Bishop Street. So this is another, even with all the different filters that you have within Papakilo, you still have instances like this. So the consequences of improperly collected data include inability to answer research questions accurately, unable to repeat and validate the study, distorted findings, resulted in wasted resources, misleading other researchers to pursue fruitless avenues of investigation, and it compromises decisions for public policy, thus causing harm to our wahi kupuna. So here's one we all love to hate. God bless OEQC for digitizing the EAs and EISs, but God, try to find what you want in there. I don't know about you, but it drives me nuts. You can put in a search word, you got to look by decades, and I'm sorry, it just a good example of good intentions and bad result. What's wrong with this method? Well, okay, we're going to go by TMKs, that's all very good. What happens with statewide and multi-zone? How are you going to look for something in there? Submerged resources. Nice little catch-all, but really think about how you're going to look for material. And that's one of the things that data managers always think about is your patrons, who are your users. And so that you don't just think like, well, I have this knowledge and I'm an expert, and so therefore these records should be arranged this way. No, they should be arranged for your users. So this is an example on the right-hand side of what happens when you're thinking, well, this project was, you got the TMKs, oh, very nice, you got the zone 1 to 9, and then all of a sudden you have Eva Plain and Hawaii Kai Marina, because that was a project base, right? Somebody was reviewing that. So that doesn't help you at all, especially when you're looking for something in the future. That's not necessarily regarding the marina, but maybe the same area, a totally different project. So, and then there's this lack of consistency. A friend of mine is with the Army, and I said, well, how do you arrange your data? And she says, oh, by facility, right? So it's all by facility. So unfortunately, when you have Oahu, military, and then you have all of a sudden, like all of a sudden you have this island, and then you went down to a specific military installation on the Big Island. Wrong. The other thing, correspondence and then a report plan. Well, this is somebody's, the user wants them together. When I was at SHPE, everybody would say, I want this report and I want the letter that approved the project. Well, now I can't, I gotta look in 2 different places. The metadata is different. It's a nightmare. Here's another thing. What are we calling it? Okay? Are we calling it by its Hawaiian name? Are we including diacriticals? Will your programming recognize it, or you get those funny little dots and squares and everything when you're trying to translate it? So these are the types of things that you have to consider when managing your data as well. Structured data, it really is worth it. This is structured data. This is just an example that the NPS has. But if you have consistency, instead of data being reproduced in multiple locations for use by internal or external consumers, data only needs to be updated once. If you have accuracy, you have to have the data only being updated from that one place. Your search engines have to understand. Your standard methods have to adhere to that. Reuse, can you use it in apps? Can you use it in websites and maps and RSS feeds and such? So here, a lot of you are familiar with this one. This is a very nice database that's been created. It has different ways of looking for information. So I'm sorry for using this as an example, but it shows that it didn't cross-index. So you have 346 with an initial for middle name, and yet you only have 1. So you might be missing something. So all these things are happening. Don't be discouraged. I've seen too many people create databases in silos everywhere, what they think is going to be useful. It can't communicate with anybody else. People have done this. Some bright archivist somewhere in the world came up with mapping the world of cultural metadata standards. So metadata is basically the glue that makes information useful. Standards are useful as metadata is only useful if we can all use the same system. So for instance, someone might say classical music and hip hop, and somebody else would say, oh no, it's Baroque and rap. Somebody will say nahi nahi. You know, you have to come together. So one of my things on my bucket list is to have a controlled vocabulary we can all be part of, that we all participate, we all use the same vocabulary. That and losing 40 pounds. So then we have domains. Those are the data sets that are the primary data before they are interpreted. That is the value of archives. That's the raw data. That's the primary data. It's not somebody else interpreting it. So these are the kinds of things that should be available to all of us. And communities are not just repositories. You know, you are the community. Your people are the community. So these are the types of things that we should be considering. You can, it's overflowing. I meant it to do fancy things. Okay. There are existing platforms. NPS has, other organizations, geographic organizations have that. There is several examples that are like Chicago, Cultural Chicago and such. So content standards, these will all, there's international standards for collaboration. Don't think that we cannot take advantage of this. Somebody has created the standards, how to manage our data. Let's take advantage of this and apply it to what we have. Other organizations, other communities have done so, we can too. There are some content standards. We might as well go for the federal guidelines. International standards, you have the ISO. God, I'm so sorry these didn't go out. But look at all the different types of metadata records that there are. So these are all available to us. Digitization standards. People think if they just scan something, it'll be all good. No, there are different digitization standards that you should be aware of as well. And my favorite is that you have a trusted digital repository. And that's something that we should be aspiring to, because it's not one thing to just scan it and call it a day. You really have to do all this. There's the OIS that makes sure that everybody, that your resources are available to the public. It's in a format that everybody, every browser can find it. And look, somebody else has already looked at metadata schemas for cultural heritage organizations. So let's not ignore that. Yes, it's a man from Turkey, but he knows. I looked at it. He knows it. It's transferable. So I encourage you to think about it. Let's stop working in silos and let's get a kako thing going. Mahalo.
Pa ahea hai maila ke nauna aloha miki oi o olau nui yakako ke aloha nui, ke aloha aloha, ke aloha piko vai olu yakako apo aloha. My name is Pūlama Lima, and today I'll be presenting on Indigenous knowledge generation and management. And to be honest, when I was first voluntold to speak on this panel, I was super nervous. One, because I cannot English at all to save my life. And two, because like most of us here, my background isn't in information science and management. But I felt like the information that I could provide was through a different lens and is more through an Indigenous perspective. And so my hopes for this presentation is that it will not only ignite conversations that address the ways in which we handle and deal generating Ike Hawaii and managing it, but that it will also ignite the pilina between the disciplines and practices of CRM and information science, and so that we can really see it as one collective, and how we also value Ike Hawaii. So, show of hands and be honest, how many of you have heard of knowledge generation and knowledge management before? Lies. No, I'm just joking. Okay, well, for the most of us here, it was like me. You know, it's nothing, unless you're in research or you're in information science, you don't really think about the theoretical or methodological foundations behind knowledge generation and management. So I kind of wanted to prompt this presentation by providing the consensing definitions of these terms. So the Western definition of knowledge generation is basically generating and sharing knowledge specifically within organizations and institutions to better enhance their practices within their organizations. Being that we are in Hawaii, and all of us here have some type of role in preserving the heritage and culture of this place, the knowledge, the research, and the resources that we deal with, for the most part, either derived from or impact the Native Hawaiians, correct? Okay. But within our own organizations and institutions, how cognizant are we in generating and managing Ike Hawaii? And is it done with the traditional context of how and for what purpose Ike Hawaii should be generated and managed? If the Western definition of knowledge generation is the generating of knowledge to enhance the performance of organizations to benefit themselves, what then does generating Ike Hawaii enhance, and for whom? And kind of like the Olelo No'eau mentioned, what does managing Ike Hawaii look like if knowledge can be gained and shared by many sources and through different platforms? Okay, knowledge management. So, you know, in really thinking about knowledge generation, to be full honest disclosure, when I saw knowledge generation as the panel theme, my instinct, or what my mind went to first, was the passing of knowledge from one generation to another. And I think that already speaks to the way, as Indigenous people, we look at Ike. Yeah, it's nothing that is for one person's gain or for one organization's benefit. It's how do we ho'oili this Ike Hawaii to the next generation. But kind of switching gears, but kind of keeping that in mind, and looking at knowledge management. Knowledge management is a system that helps people in organizations share and access and update business and organization information to enhance their own organizations, right? So long story short, in reflecting on traditional ways of managing ike, the first thing that popped into my mind was the mo'olelo, or story of Ka'iwakīloumoku Hawaiian. Show of hands, I'm sure majority of us are familiar with this mo'olelo. Okay, I don't have to tell it again because I only get 5 minutes. But traditionally, our kupuna use ipu, or gourds, as a way to store both tangible and non-tangible objects. Special gourds, like the one mentioned in the mo'olelo, were often referred to as ipu o ka'ike, or receptacles of knowledge, and were regarded for their abilities as receptacles to not only store and house, but to also manipulate the things that surrounded them when accessed. Does that make sense? Ka'iwakīloumoku Hawaiian in particular contained all the winds of Hawaii, well, most of them, as well as the bones of the kupuna who learned to control those winds. And as in ipu o ka'ike, this notion suggests that, one, our kupuna place value on EV as well as natural resources as forms of knowledge, that our people have traditional databases and therefore traditional management procedures and protocols, and three, that those accessing these traditional databases were first educated and trained in the benefits, consequences, practices, and protocols that came with the kuleana of malamaing the ipu o ka'ike. Giving and receiving access to such resources were intentional, purposeful, and aligned with, most times, with ohana kuleana. In the next few slides, I will provide some examples on how the Office of Hawaiian Affairs manages and generates Ike Hawaii. As part of our mission, we intentionally and purposefully generate and manage Ike Hawaii with the sole purpose to enhance the well-being of Native Hawaiians. I'm not sure how much of you know the history behind OHA and their knowledge generating, but during the early 1990s, this was the real catalyst, right, of all of this knowledge generation and management. In collaboration with the Department of Health, State Archives, and DHHL, OHA was tasked with improving access to genealogical information for Native Hawaiians. Kind of what Dom mentioned earlier, right? All of these Hawaiians are trying to apply for kuleana tax exemptions, they're trying to apply for Hawaiian homelands, but they need to verify their genealogy. And so OHA was tasked with making those documents accessible. And so as a result of that, OHA digitized all the state genealogical records and vital statistics and created the first management process to provide digital access to these resources. The outcomes of this early project eventually fed into a more well-known data management system known as Papakilo database. And according to the registration survey, majority of you here are familiar with Papakilo. But I'm not sure if most of you are familiar with the intention and history behind its creation. Papakilo is often referred to as the digital database of databases, and we just heard from Helen that it's all wrong. So I'll go back and reassess. But its intention, right? The intention is not to be the sole repository of Ike Hawaii, but to really provide the platform to make things accessible by our kaiaulu, by our lahui. For somebody who lives on Molokai, it's hard for me to fly to Oahu, to go to the Bureau of Surveillance, to go to the Department of Health, to go to SHPD for records. And so the intention behind Papakilo database was to really provide access as a repository, digital access, right? In addition to Papakilo, the little bit more sexy sister, OHA developed the Kipuka database, which links Ike Hawaii to geographical land bases using cutting-edge GIS technology. The intention behind this database is a little different from Papakilo. While Papakilo provides access to different historical records and documents, it serves mainly as a digital repository, whereas Kipuka was intentionally crafted as a tool to inform contemporary land management practices based on traditional Native Hawaiian land management tenureship practices. The information found in this database was set forth to help inform place-based research and knowledge. And of course, as OHA, we come with our set of challenges. For this topic specifically, it's data sovereignty. I'm not sure, how many of you guys have gotten into the conversation of data sovereignty, but it's basically how do we, as a Lahui, determine how we want to manage our ike. As a state agency in OHA, though our intentions are to provide access for the betterment and well-being of Native Hawaiians, as a state agency, we are required to also provide that same amount of access to people who are trying to access this information that works against the benefit for Native Hawaiians. And so as a challenge, how do we as a collective pūpa'akai and really figure out these solutions to systemic change? Oh, this olelo no ea mai kaula'i naivi o nā kupuna serves as a reminder of the sanctity of knowledge, and that the way we manage and value ike should also be held in the same standards as how we manage and value iwi as well as kula iwi. Ano laila me ia mana'o e kua li'u a e kua pa'a kako I ola mau na iwi a kako na iwi ola. Mahalo.
Tēnei tururu tuku mai nei ki hai mahiti, ki hai marakaraka, tūpoko tururu te reikau. This is the head of the little native owl that hoots. It does not bob up and down, it does not waver from side to side. Be alert. Kia ora mai tātou. I've been asked to talk about Kahuru Manu, which is the Ngāi Tahu Tribe's cultural mapping website. Sorry, I'll get this right. There we go. Kahuru Manu is a really exciting project. We're excited about it. Other people might sometimes, other iwi might become excited about it. It may be relevant here. It perhaps relates a little bit to some of the stuff you just saw. But it's got some challenges, and one of the big challenges is that the kind of information... Oh, kia ora mai. One of the challenges is the kind of information it deals with is not the kind of information that our government agencies and our heritage industry privilege. So just a bit of background. Oh, kia ora mai. So just a bit of background. My tribe is Ngāi Tahu. We cover the South Island, south of that red line there. Everywhere south of the red line is our iwi territory. It was settled about 750 years ago when the rest of New Zealand was, and a lot of our place names and a lot of our histories relate to that initial occupation. It was a time when the moa got hunted out, along with the east coast forests of the South Island being burnt off. Part of that burning process meant that the land converted to tussock. With the conversion to tussock, we got the cabbage tree coming back through, the tikoka. We also got the wood hen. So while the moa disappeared, we had these other food resources that came through, and all of the landscape continued to be important to us. And that also relates to the sort of succession of place names throughout that history. But one of the consequences of converting the land to tussock, because it also made it really easy for the Europeans to convert it to pastoral sheep farming when they arrived. And so right from early on, from the 1850s, a lot of our South Island area was converted to farming, the land was alienated, Māori were being trespassed off the land from the 1850s, our iwi got put onto little tribes got put onto little coastal reserves, and with that we started to get a disconnect between some of our wahi tupuna, and the histories of those started to recede a little bit. But it was not without challenge. We had our land claim started by our tupuna Te Ramorahiu in 1849. And there were successive generations, over 150 years, of us fighting our land claim, a continual land claim. So with that, every generation was supporting and reinvigorating our understandings and knowledges of our wahi tupuna, or wahi tupuna. The last part of that, the last big push was in 1986, where we had the Waitangi Tribunal. And the thing with that is it meant all of our histories for the land claim were put through this kind of court-like process of interrogation. There was a huge consequence of it is our tribe has ended up with a huge archive, which includes a lot of our place name histories and a lot of the activities that were carried on by our tupuna at those place names, at those wāhi tupuna, even though they haven't been revisited necessarily recent. A few things all came together at one point about over the last 10 to 15 years. First up, with our land claim settlement, our iwi has grown our tribal resource to about 1.6 billion New Zealand. So with that, we can now start investing in our own cultural mapping programs. But also another key factor was we had some of our researchers in the land claim process still around. One recently passed on, the late Trevor House in the bottom corner there. So we had our historians still with us, who had freshly gone through all of those wāhi tupuna histories, but we also had champions of place name heritage, place naming, such as my own father and the oral history programs that he was running. As part of that, we also had this wonderful opportunity where GIS and the internet all come together at once, while we've still got these other people around, the history's fresh. And so we started our own cultural mapping project, which was driven by some of the young ones in our tribal office. And tied up with that, they worked with at least 3 or 4 people from each of our 18 marae, going back, revisiting the sites, re-looking at them, reconnecting with them, and writing up those histories as best we could. And so in the end, we've had over 50 people actively involved in developing Ka Huru Manu. So Ka Huru Manu was launched about a year and a half ago. At the moment, we've got about 1,200 of our sites listed on it, and it's driven by the GIS. What we can do is you can click on any of our wāhi tupuna, and it pulls up a kōrero, a history of the location, along with all of the reference sources that history has been drawn from, including the histories that our previous claim negotiators and claimants over the generations have put in. At the moment, there's about 225,000 hits on the website, so there does seem to be a bit of an appetite. One of the exciting things for us that's just happened is the New Zealand Geographic Board, which is the government agency responsible for place names, official place names in New Zealand. They've just recognised Ka Huru Manu as an official place name source. So what that means is all of our place names that were on Ka Huru Manu, and if there is a place name already in the Gazetteer, the New Zealand Gazetteer, the Ka Huru Manu name sits alongside it as an alternative official name. Importantly, if there wasn't a name listed in the Gazetteer, our Ka Huru Manu names become the official name. So with that, what we've actually ended up with is this recognition by the government of their integrity, if you like, of the research behind Ka Huru Manu. To our understanding, this is the first time a government has done that, recognised Indigenous place names, histories like that, in quite the same way. So at the moment, the New Zealand government's about to take Ngāi Tahu off to the United Nations Place Names Committee to show them our Ka Huru Manu initiative. Where do we go from here? We've got about 4,000 more place names that need to be researched and added to Ka Huru Manu. It'd be neat to integrate with it our whakapapa, or our genealogies, to some of the Māori reserve lands, which for a lot of our whānau are an important part of their tribal identity. And there's also our rock art sites and our archaeological sites that we can also start to layer up onto this information system. But the archaeological and the rock art sites, they're a different kind of data. And so, by way of example, our wāhi tupuna names from Ka Huru Manu are the little red dots here. They're general names. I mean, they probably relate to something that's sort of a location that would consider in sort of a 1 to 2 kilometre kind of a radius. They're different from the if you like, the archaeological sites, which are very precise. The geographical precision of the archaeological sites is recorded in the New Zealand Archaeological Site Record System, which is the official system in New Zealand. The problem with it is our government agencies, our local government, they all privilege that the physical sites that they can recognise. And that's because they're the sites that they're having to deal with, or the ideas that they're having to deal with cultural resource management processes. Instead, for Wāhi Tupuna stories, what we have is the Heritage New Zealand. It registers Wāhi Tupuna, but in the whole of the South Island would be lucky to get a handful of registrations each year. And then the Department of Conservation, they deal with our Wāhi Tupuna stories too, but they're interested in how that's helping public interpretation of conservation sites and landscapes, rather than actually generating the knowledge. So the 2 points I want to finish with is, first up, if place names and our place stories are the first part of our connection or reconnection to our Wāhi Tupuna, then our tribe needs to have ways to keep that going, the long-term research going, in a context where we don't have the land claim to drive it. This is the first time we've had that challenge. And the second point, is if the government has a role in preserving Māori heritage, then shouldn't some of those efforts be better directed to and prioritise the kind of information that is important to Māori reconnection with our Wāhi Tupuna, preserving the Māori stories, and those things that are important for our iwi cultural survival, rather than, if you like, being driven by the legal frameworks, the legislative frameworks that are focused on dealing with RMA, or in this case, CRM type issues. So on that, he mihi kia koutou, thank you for your invitation to be here, and thank you for your listening. Kia ora mai.
Aloha mai kako. Just a little history. I was Helen's intern once, scanning her documents and creating the database behind it, metadata. But I used to be a data person. I don't call myself that too much anymore. I've worked on Papakilo when I worked at OHA. I've worked on Kipuka. And know the challenges, but also what I'm going to talk about is kind of the why, the what's next, and how do we get from collecting and inventorying data to seeing some action. And I just started with so I'm talking about research and management-driven data initiatives. So how do we get from collecting that data, storing the data, knowing that data, using the data, and how does that going to drive some action? And I always think about this reactive versus proactive, right? How much data is collected reactively? There's a project being done. Most of the data is compliance driven. It's just a disclosure document that developers, landowners have to do in order to move forward in their permits. And it's usually done too late. A project exists, they want you to do a survey, you collect the data, and then we get into a lot of problems that way. Proactively, alternatively, is as landowners, resource managers, we got to know where these places are before we think about what we want to do with those lands. It should inform those land management practices, and that way we can collect the data and actually think about what's the best use for that data. This is data collected. These represent Kua'iwi lines in the Kalu field system, the Kona field system, and it's when documented for compliance reasons at the time, it was about like 15,000 features, or is it just one site? Is it a cultural landscape? Is it the largest contiguous cultural landscape of the Kona field system that we know today? and how do we preserve that? Those kind of actions is something we deal with at Kamehameha Schools. It took 10 years to actually negotiate out this portion of the field system from being in coffee. But these things take time. Data does contribute to that. But what do we really want to see? We kind of want to see what's on the ground. There's not just a set of lines on the map. It's not just this archaeology that's there. There's tons of sources of information that are there. The archaeology is pretty easy. There's lines on a map. GIS can do that. But what we don't really see is the oral history interviews that went into rediscovering this place. We don't see as easily the ethnography, the research in the Hawaiian newspapers that went through a place like this. And we're often like, we get kind of too technical a lot of times. I was kind of thinking about this last night. I was like, we did a project that said phase 2 testing of microfossil analysis of this portion of the Kalu field system. But what we were trying to do, we wanted to know what our kupuna planted, so we can restore to that. We can know what plants that they were using, so then we can go and replant that if we want to. So we know we're not over there trying to restore it from a natural resource perspective without actually knowing what our kupuna did. And I think that's the real value of cultural resource, archaeology, ethnographic research, and data collection that can contribute to the natural resource sector. And this is the outcome. It's restored field system in what we used to call Ka'alu field system. It's now we call Ka'alu Kuahewa referencing Kamehameha's large plantation he builds when he resides in Kailua Kona. And then Auntie Hannah this morning was talking about Kaupulehu, and I was thinking about that last night, developing these slides. But it's the same thing. I think she had mentioned Kamehameha Schools doing research, and knowing that this is the abundance we want to get back. Same thing. We wanted to look into the collection, into the data that was collected by Paul Rosenthal's collection, and we wanted to find out what was happening 100 years ago before development was there, before the access was easier for everyone as Kona developed, that Coast Development Resort. And again, kind of thinking about it, we commissioned a study. It was kind of focused on marine subsistence and ecology of the ahupua'a, but we just wanted to dig through the trash of our kupuna and really find out what they harvested from the ocean, what was bioculturally important to them, so we could restore it to that. And then kind of leaving you guys with, what's the point of all this data? It's good to inventory, we know what's there, it's good for land use planning, resource management planning, and so forth. But what does it contribute to us, to Kanaka, to the environment, and so forth? And the growing trend that's happening in Hawaii the last 5 years is the development of the Aloha Plus Challenge. We have these shared sustainability and natural resource management dashboard and measures and metrics, which is tied to the Sustainable Development Goals done by the UN, and they're really playing on this local to global. What's globally important, and how do we make that relevant locally? And then here's all the dashboards and metrics. What's absent, and I go to a few meetings on this, is the culture in this. It is weaved in here. In natural resource management, maybe waste, maybe not so much, and so forth. But and Aina-based education. But what are those metrics that we can contribute to the Aloha Plus Challenge dashboard? This is what's happening with the partners in that collaboration. Tons of partners, and I think that's what we're envisioning for us in the collective. And it got me to look at, what is the global cultural UN sustainability goal? It's kind of hubbed in the sustainable cities and communities, and in an effort to strengthen efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage. That's our kind of a connection right now, and how do we see us moving forward in that, in terms of taking this, all the data we talk about, we collect, and how do we make it relevant at the global and local levels. And that's what I'm leaving us with here today. Like at the local level, how does our data inform these collective dashboards? How do we develop collective measures? And what are those collective outcomes we want to see around our Wahikupuna stewardship? Mahalo.
So while we're resetting up the panelists, can you guys take out that little card that was passed out to all the tables and fill out the question under the panel one while everybody gets set up? Oh my gosh, you guys are tall. That was really inspiring, all you guys. Now we're gonna drill you with questions. The first question that I'd like to ask is actually for Gerard, but it can definitely go around the circle. I was originally gonna ask you with the Kahuru Manu, what did you see within it that we could or should implement here? But just hearing you talk and Jason follow up, it's obvious it was a very proactive thing, and your iwi drove that. I'm very curious what the cost was, because it wasn't an agency funded. You self-funded and self-motivated this as something that you saw as needed and necessary. And then, you don't have to share that if it's private, but also what's next? Like if you could continue that proactive movement, what would you want to add to it? Like where do you see it going?
Kia ora koutou. Oh, yeah. The cost of Kahuru Manu, I can't give you an exact dollar figure, I don't know. But talking with our team, over the last 10 years, it's been about 3 full-time equivalent positions. And our tribe pays not excessively well, but moderately well. So if you think of it in that context, that's how, sort of 10 years of 3 people full-time. That doesn't fully count the cost of like all the software licensing that's come with that, nor the hui, the travel and the wānanga of getting some of our other iwi members out there helping with the cultural mapping initiatives, the local marae. One of the things about it is it's, while Kahuru Manu is run by the central organisation of our tribe, it's driven by all of the information in it, all of the listings were driven by our local marae. They go through and select what they want to put on. They're the ones also going through, helping with the researching and adding and, if you like, doing local quality control on the histories and the information going forward onto Kahuru Manu. So one of the things about the cost of it is you've actually, in real terms, got a local cost plus the central cost. In terms of where we go forwards, there's no doubt that, this kind of work, and I suppose that's the point I was trying to get across, is this kind of work is not the whiz-bang kind of stuff that people get all excited about. It's the long, hard slog of going through the archives and all of that kind of stuff. It's the long, hard slog of sitting down and doing all of the oral history interviews and going out to those sites, those places, quite often negotiating with farmers to get access to land again and all of that. So it's a big part of the future of it will be sort of like trying to integrate other layers of information, but ensuring that they've got the same kind of integrity and also trying to understand how to communicate, like I was trying to express with the archaeological data and the place names data, trying to understand that respect the different kinds of data or the integrity of each different kind of data, but at the same time also not sort of just ignoring the fact that they're different kinds of data, therefore we shouldn't try to put them together, which is what some of the government agencies tend to think about. Rather, there are ways we need to build connections between the the different data sets. So there's a lot of challenges there, and the key thing, probably the most important thing with Kahuru Manu, is we've got 53,000 people in our tribe, most of whom don't have an opportunity to get out to the sites, but this is a way that they can access that information and that heritage. And so when they do have an opportunity to go to those places or to follow up on their family histories in particular localities and that, the resources there for them to do it. That's the most important thing about it, is creating the facility for the future opportunities, if that doesn't sound too cliched. Kia ora mai.
Naia asked if she could have one. That's amazing. And when you're talking about Kahuru Manu and all of you guys, access is a reoccurring theme. And Pūlama spoke to it really well. And it's a theme that came up constantly in our collective surveys, that they want community access. We want community access to this information, to the location of places, place names, these sites. But there's a challenge to the access as well. And so there's two big challenges that I can think of. And if you guys want to address it, one is who should hold the information. So I had a DHL land manager, who's not here, in a contract, be careful what you give us, because we're a state agency and everything we have can get FOIA'd. So he had that trust to the organization that was doing research for him to say, if it's sensitive or if you think it's, like family or kupuna based, don't give it to us. Filter that because of that risk. So one, that's the issue of holding access, and two, the idea of giving out access. And another challenge becomes the Kipuka database, because families can access, but I've heard title companies have used that as their reference, and it wasn't on Kipuka, so it's fine. Even though things could be missing, it's obviously not the be-all, end-all. So if you guys want to speak to that challenge of access, who holds it, who do we give it to? And Helen's brought up in the past the practical aspect of that. If we do move forward to develop these centralized hub or a new Wahi Kupuna type database for us as a collective, as a community, these challenges are going to be something we need to practically address.
Test, okay. I remember Kikuela saying this one time, and it really resonated with me this while back. It's like, there's so much easy access to information, data, and so forth, and it's gotten like people that they don't know how to do research anymore. And I feel like there's a certain, you gotta have certain skills to do research and find the information, and we gotta find the right balance of allowing access to our communities, to the general public, because it could kind of come back at you. And yeah, so the access is really difficult. There's proprietary information, legal information that will get out if you allow access. So like when I look at research, sometimes I have like my trusted sources, and a lot of times it's on my hard drive. Like I know I can go to, what is it, Papakilo, and look at Mahele databases, but I have like the PDF files from the work that Kipau Mali did for Kamehameha schools years ago, and I just go to that resource because I know it, So I think there's a lot of things that go into access, and as a researcher, even as a community member, you have your trusted sources, and you gotta kind of have a wide variety of how people access. Just my perspective.
regarding different levels of access, when I was initially hired by Land Assets, it was to create a land legacy database, and so I used Huliauapaʻa as the platform because, and then back then, they didn't have a GIS interface. And so I worked with the developers down there and we developed, and so the professor that taught them all said, I would have never known. You know, it was such a cutting edge thing to have that GIS interface that now Kipuka uses. But what I was charged to do was to have different levels of access within the land legacy database, so that if you were students or the public, you would have a certain level. However, you were the land manager, you would have a different level. And that's very easily done through authentication. So, you know, academic libraries do that all the time. You have to be faculty or a student of that particular campus so that you can have access to these databases, and that can be done the same way. As far as FOIA, and when I was at SHPE, I know that Regina's burial treatment plans and certain, you know, related things, those were military reports. You know, you have different levels of access as well. So I don't see an online presence being a problem. I think that it can be very easily addressed.
In terms of access for databases like Papakilo and Kipuka, you know, I did mention earlier that as a state agency, we are required to hand over information that we obtain. But theoretically, it's already information that anybody can get at any other state agency. So these are records that you can find at the state archives, at DOH. The reasoning for trying to consolidate the information was just to make it easier for those who don't have the resources because of certain barriers. I cannot drive in from Waimanalo or Nanakuli or wherever you are to access these repositories. So in that sense, it's already public information that we just kind of consolidated. In my own personal views on access, I think that it should be on the community level. Though I do feel like, you know, we should have an inventory of the inventory, but it's really within the communities and the ohana. It's really in the ohana and how they want to manage and share their information. But kind of like how I spoke to in my presentation, you know, you can have this entire, you can have we have Google. We can have Google, but I still know people who know nothing. You kind of have to know something to know something. And it goes back to your research-driven agenda, right? And how do we train researchers to utilize the tools that we have access to, and then how that can just be a leverage to access things that aren't so accessible, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Oh, kia ora mai koutou. Two things that popped to mind with access to information that we've got is one is that we've my marae, my runanga, the ones I've worked with most closely, tend to take a view of like being careful about access and access protocols up front. And so we tend to kind of like be careful to try to limit sort of like how much access to tribal informations and that kind of a thing gets out there to the wider world. One of the things that when I was heritage manager for Ngāi Tahu, one of the things that we actually, an approach we took was, first of all, get the information, lay it out on the table, have a look at it, and then decide what stuff is sensitive and what isn't. We found that trying to write access protocols from a marae level at the outset used to be quite challenging if we didn't have the full set of information in front of us. Once we'd done the recordings, pulled the information up, it was much easier to sort of say, oh, well, that's the kind of, that stuff's all right, that stuff we want to be a bit more protective of, and, you know, here's where we put the access levels. And so sometimes I think one of the key things, or that we, from our experience, is that access requirements, on one hand, sort of, it's not something that's set in stone.
It's sort of a dialectic, you know, it bounces backwards and forwards with experience and understanding of knowledge and how that information and knowledge shifts. The other side of the coin is when we have tended to be, probably the thing that our tribe has been most restrictive on access is whakapapa, or genealogy. And there was, for at one point, a big issue about whether or not we actually put our whakapapas onto computer and that kind of a thing. And sort of, this is going back a few years, but sort of like whether we put it onto computers, because then other people, if they can hack into it and that, they can get family histories out and that kind of a thing. The counterpoint of us being restrictive on whakapapa is that at the moment, if people want to get digital whakapapa, the easiest place that they can go is ancestry.com and all of those other places where different members of our iwi are putting information on and generating it and that kind of a thing. And so we don't have the, from a tribal perspective, we can't, you know, sort of encourage kind of like the care, if you like, or the care of the research of those histories and those family whakapapa before they get put out there. And so I can find a whole lot of stuff that distant cousins of mine have put on about my tupuna, which I would say are half pie informed. So there's the two sides of the coin, and yeah, from our, a thought from our experience. Kia ora mai.
All of you guys are off the hook now, and we're going to go into our breakout groups, and we have our questions. And I'll go ahead and put back up kind of those three main topics and the so far developed action solutions. Oh, are we taking questions? Kelly said, oh, ole, kalamai. I know Io was like, oh. Yep, so if you guys can, the facilitators and the note takers can put out the questions, if you guys can break out and find solutions.